everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexie. This episode continues our season looking at modern retellings of the Illiad and the Odyssey, ancient epics known for both brutal violence and instances of sexual assault. This episode is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snack ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story.
Hello.
I am excited about this.
I was going to say, so I want to let everyone know that I have already both read and listened to the audiobook version of A Thousand Ships, and it's one of my favorite things. It's probably top 3 favorite things to read. So I want to know, what did you think of the first half?
Excellent. Absolutely excellent. Again, kind of like Wrath Goddess, I went in with a couple of expectations, but not an awful lot. I hadn't done a bunch of research about how the book's written, what it's about, beyond the Trojan War. So opening up with the muse Calliope, essentially complaining about Homer. Sorry, it's been a morning. Complaining about Homer was fantastic. Beautiful opening, and it just kind of got better. And it's a wonderful book. It's really wonderful. And again, like with Wrath Goddess, Natalie Haynes clearly has done ton of research. And then you again didn't do any reading prior to this, but then I went and Googled her, and obviously she's been a classicist for forever. I think she started learning Latin in age 11, which is British, just starting secondary school. So clearly this is a thing that she's been doing for at least all of her adult life, and apparently most of her teenage years as well. And it's fantastic. It's so imaginative, and her writing is so funny. And again, you do research, and she was a stand-up comic for 10 years, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes a whole ton of sense. No, love it. Absolutely love it. Beautiful. And I like each chapter, for those who haven't read it, each chapter is telling the story from the perspective of a different woman or different group of women who are involved somehow in the Trojan War. And you've got the Trojan women who are the royal family, who are obviously there, and then you've got letters from Penelope to Odysseus, and the experiences of Paris's wife, whose name I just cannot pronounce. Onoi, maybe? Oinoni, thank you. There's a handy dandy pronunciation guide at the beginning, which I did look at several times and then completely forgot, obviously. And with her, she's not there, but what is happening is obviously deeply personal to her, and affects her life and her son in a way that you probably don't really think about, and you don't get a picture of in other adaptations and retellings. And no, it's beautiful. And I love also the way that it kind of jumps around the timeline. So it the first Trojan woman chapter is all of the Trojan women stuff is after the fall of Troy. It's what happens to the women following that, and you kind of get their relationships as seen through the lens of defeat and the reality of being sold, or not sold, but captured and taken into slavery and servitude. And then you've got Thetis's wedding and the golden apple episode that kind of jumps you all the way right back to the beginning. And no, I love it. Absolutely love it. And having it in these discrete little chapters, because some of the chapters, especially the stuff with Calliope, the muse, whose name, we've established I can't speak Greek, so that's fine at this point. But her chapters are 1 or 2 pages, maybe. And then you have slightly longer chapters, and it's really easy to kind of read a segment. And if you need to put it down, you can. But you don't have to. and I kind of read most of the first half last night because it was just so good. So no, it's amazing. I can't believe it's taken me this long to read it.
To be fair, I had not read it either until I got like a kick in the pants because like I had to I was asked to interview her about this book, and so I was like, oh crap, I need to read it. So I did also have to read it under like time constraints, but I read it in print the first time, but then I discovered that Natalie herself reads the audiobook version, and I mean, I can't say enough good things. I mean, it is perfectly read. I love her voice for it, and she pronounces all the names for me, so I don't have to. So, and it's funny because she pronounces it in the British way. So half of these, like, I have the very British like way of saying it like in my head at any given time, knowing that's not how I would pronounce it naturally. So for those wondering, in the audiobook, she does actually pronounce it Calliope, which is funny because, you know, I would say Calliope, but that doesn't sound anywhere near as nice, you know. So yeah, no, I love the short segments. I love the jumping of the timelines. But within all of this, did you have like a standout or a favorite, character, woman that we visited so far?
That's difficult to say. I'm going to start with one and then I will have a think because my first one is kind of a cheat. I really enjoyed that, even though they're very short, I very much have enjoyed Calliope's segments. I like it feels like she's kind of standing in for the author's voice, and there's a good amount of kind of not quite berating Homer but criticizing him internally for not understanding that his epic, even though he wants this like grand heroic adventure, his epic is not, because the way Calliope sees epic working is as a myriad of little tragedies. And that is a fantastic description for what you get in the book, at least the first half. And I assume it just continues as awesomely as it starts out, but that's what you get. It's 100 little mini tragedies from every woman whose life has been impacted by this. And I think Calliope does, or Natalie through Calliope does a fantastic job of kind of explaining why this is important and why these women's stories need to be told, because the men's stories are absolutely everywhere. And I read an interview with Natalie after I read the first half of this, and actually it's the one that you sent me about her upcoming book on Medusa. She said as much. She said, look, the men's stories are everywhere, and for Medusa as well. We know what happened with Perseus. We know it. Medusa, much more interesting, but not spoken about nearly as much, which gives an awful lot of freedom for a writer with what you do with the story. And while this book, while Thousand Ships, is very much rooted in the plethora of source material there is about the Iliad, it's very, it felt very personal. It felt very like real and true, and it was very, very good. But I really liked Calliope's kind of framing of the narrative and what's going on. How about you? Who's your favorite?
Well, I will just add, because I do love Calliope and Calliope. So for those who don't have the physical book, or just who haven't read it, the chapters are basically by name, not really number. So, you know, it's kind of hard to be like this exact chapter unless you're counting. But one of the Calliope chapters, she literally starts off by being very cross with Homer, where she's like, no, I don't want to sing for you. I don't want to do this. I don't want to say this. And I love the certain chapter where she talks about all casualties of war having to include women, because there's this one point where it's kind of a takeoff on the original, you know, sing muse, and then she's like, no, you want me to sing about this man and his tragedy? And then she kind of goes off on this tirade about how when you look at war, all the casualties have to be included, including women, and how like killing on the battlefield is not the only thing that makes a tragedy. The lives of those women captured also is a tragedy. So I loved that chapter.
I think the next Calliope segment, I think she says, why is it that that her act of raising a son, how is that less heroic than what any of the men do on the battlefield? Which I enjoyed that. I thought that was nice.
So, I mean, I just love how, yes, this book basically is told through the eyes of Calliope, but I would say for the first half, there are 2 chapters that stand out for different reasons. One is, I think, the second chapter, which is Creusa. It's one of the longer chapters in the entire book, and it's this really harrowing retelling of sort of Creusa's courtship with Aeneas and how she felt. It basically retells the night that Troy burned, and what you get is like her fleeing the house, her talking about looking for Aeneas, looking for his father, looking, oh, he's not with me, he's being a dutiful son, and he's attending to his father. And how she talks about, well, we have a son, but I don't really know where he is either. And it's basically her running around a burning Troy, trying to find her way out. And for those who have read the Aeneid, at least, that she perishes in the fire. So she doesn't make it out. And it's interesting because the book doesn't really make it clear that, she clearly dies. So it's a very harrowing chapter because of what I felt was like the great detail she put into describing a burning Troy and all of her feelings toward her husband. And yeah, it was such a standout chapter.
I really liked the decision to have that the first like major chapter, start at the end of the epic. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was very clever.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be good when it's one of the longer ones. I will say, because of my circumstances of being in Greece, I'm listening to the audiobook, so everyone will have to forgive me if my references of segments are a bit different. But when I'm listening to the audiobook version, that very first segment, it's like 40 minutes compared to like all the other segments are like under 5 minutes or something around there. So you knew it's going to be good. And then the other segment that really stood out to me that I love is the goddess chapter, where you have these very playful goddesses, and it's retelling essentially the contest for who wins the golden apple that starts everything. So having now looked at the goddesses in Wrath Goddess, I was very excited to talk to you about the differences. So, like, what did you think about the characterization that Natalie has on them here versus how Maya did it?
I feel like the goddesses in Thousand Ships are much more in line with maybe what we would expect from, like, Greek deities just in, like, popular culture and popular imagination. Having said that, they're very, very well written, and there are some little, like, personality quirks that you don't get in other places. Like Aphrodite is, my God, she's a bitch, like absolute bitch, and it fits with, with like how her character is written, and you can really see that working for the goddess of like love and sex. And Athena she was surprising, actually. I think she was the most surprising for me. Paris describes her with like a girl next door, like, physical appearance, how, like, you've always admired her and you just really want to be good enough for her, and suddenly he felt like he really wanted to be good enough, and I was like, it fits with Athena, right? It's not the stoic strong warrior that we kind of see elsewhere. She's kind of like a kid, but she's a like frighteningly intelligent, capable kid. But the description of her at the beginning of the chapter is that I get the feeling she wears her helmet and her armor and carries her spear, like, to make herself taller. They say she's got the helmet on to make herself taller, but I think to like force people to take her seriously. You kind of get the impression that she doesn't feel like she would maybe be taken as seriously as the other goddesses if she did not present herself in this way. It was very, very good, and the squabble between the three of them was fantastic. It was absolutely, like, none of them have any idea what this apple is. They just all know that they want it. And then, of course, because of the inscription, they want it even more. But no, it was good. And you're right, very, very different to the Wrath Goddesses. The goddesses in Thousand Ships are much more human. You kind of which is kind of how they come across in Greek myths. Like, they're a human, like a larger than life human family who just so happen to have magical powers and live forever. So they're not as scary, they're not as unnerving, but you do see like the power and the kind of capricious vindictiveness. And at the end of the chapter, after Paris has chosen Aphrodite, I can't remember which goddess says, you didn't mention to him that Helen's already married, and she's like, well, he's already married anyway, it doesn't really matter, does it? Yeah, that tracks. How about you? What did you think of the differences?
I mean, okay, maybe I'm a little biased because I had the opportunity to interview Natalie not only once, but twice, an episode of my other podcast, Ancient Office Hours. I talked to her about her choices, and we talked about the goddesses actually in that one. So if you want to listen to that conversation, it's fantastic, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, no, I really like how playful they are. We at some point had a conversation about how we really did think of them as, they're not so different from us. They're just, they're a bit larger than life. They have these magical powers, but like at the end of the day, it is, whatever it is. But I do love how playful, Natalie wrote the goddesses. I mean, and that goes with, Natalie just being a former comedian. She's very, very funny, very witty herself. So it totally makes sense that she wrote her goddesses that way. But I love the petulance. And, at one point in the contest, when Paris is like trying to judge it, it's so funny because at one point, the goddesses, when they start making offers and saying, oh, Paris will give you this, you will have this if you choose me. It's so funny when it gets to the Athena part, she's just like, yeah, I will give you wisdom and you'll have the all-seeing owl and this, that, and the other thing. And then he looks at her owl and she just goes, you cannot have my owl. No, that is mine. Yeah, she's like, yes. She's like, no, we will get you a different one. But no, this is mine. And so just like the wittiness of that line. And it's so funny because when Natalie reads it, she reads it with all the like sarcasm you would expect. And it's glorious because she's like, you cannot have my owl. And you're just like, I'm like crying with laughter. So it's fantastic.
I liked also in that scene having Paris's inner monologue, because you get like what he thinks of each goddess and how he's like swayed by their different offers. And at one point he's talking, or he's thinking about Hera, and he like thinks to himself, like, look, because they're all completely naked at this point and they're like, choose me. And he's like looking at Hera thinking, I can't believe Zeus cheated on her once, but multiple times. And there's a line in there that says like, he even in like his struck as he was by her beauty, he thought that maybe this was not a wise thing to say. Like something in her eyes told him that she would not take that compliment the way that it was intended. I'm like, no, you don't. There are some things you do not mention to Hera, and her husband's infidelities are like top of the list, really. But it was just funny.
Yeah. No, well, and let's talk for a minute since you mentioned it. They're all naked. Well, it didn't start out that way. They went, fully gowned. But then it was so funny because when they were making their offers, at some point, Aphrodite, being the bitchy person she is, she was just like, it would be a good idea. I'm gonna use every advantage I have. So she actually takes off her gown, and then you get this great line. I think it's an inner monologue of Athena where she's like, Are we really doing this? Are we really sinking to this level? And then she's like, fine, I guess I will. And so she like out of reluctance is like stripping. And then you get more of this inner monologue where she was like talking about comparing standing next to Aphrodite, where she's like, well, now I don't feel, like good about myself. She's like, of course she's prettier than I am and she's more whatever. And so she's like, now I just feel weird. And I was like, oh, poor thing. Yeah. So the childish goddesses, I love the differences. I mean, I think, with something like Wrath Goddess, I think you need the gods to be these superhuman and super powerful, super scary things. But I really liked this humanizing aspect of it. It works really well. It was unexpected, but it was so welcome. I really I loved everything about it.
We should talk about like how Paris and Helen come across. I know we haven't obviously finished it, but I feel like the Paris and Helen here are again different to every other Paris and Helen we've seen. What did you think of them?
I think it's funny because so Helen really, she doesn't get a section to herself, which I think was an interesting choice Natalie made, that I don't want to have Helen have her own section. That would be too, I don't know, cliche,
Obvious,
easy,
yeah.
obvious, whatever. So what you get is you hear accounts of her from other people. You get it from the Trojan women. There's that great section in Creusa, which is why I love it so much. Like chapter 2, Creusa goes on this like thing where she starts talking about, was hers the face that really launched 1,000 ships? She was like, yeah, she was pretty and all, but like she wouldn't be worth going to war for.
They came for the land and the gold, and yeah, it was a convenient excuse.
Yeah, and she basically has, like, she has this monologue being like, yeah, Helen's decent and all, but like, nah, man, I wouldn't start a war. And just like the believability of it. Yeah, so Creusa talking smack about Helen I found really entertaining. And she just doesn't make her seem very likable. She was kind of just like, she just left. Okay, fine. That was really fun. What about you?
I think this is the first adaptation we've looked at where Helen is actually blamed by someone, like held responsible for the war. I mean, it comes across a little bit in Troy Fall of a City, but it didn't feel as strong watching that as reading this. And it came with the section with Creusa, but also the Trojan women section. Like none of them, except Andromache, interestingly, none of them like her. They blame it entirely on her. It sounds like they blamed it on her from the very beginning. So that's a good contrast with Fall of a City, because at the beginning everyone was very happy and they like welcomed her as like some kind of like female liberation thing. But in 1,000 Ships, it's very much, why are you here? And oh my God, now we have to deal with all of these Greeks on our beach. Like, why did you do this? And it was very interesting, the explanation Helen gives for that, because it is an actual explanation. It's not this star-crossed lovers thing that we've seen in the movie and a little bit in Fall of a City. It's not that. It is essentially, I was forced to by Aphrodite because she like gave me tinnitus. All I could hear was this high-pitched squealing, wailing sound, and the only time it relented was when I was with Paris. So my choice was live with this sound for the rest of my life, or go with this dude that the goddess essentially told me I had to go with. And Hecuba's response is, well, maybe the sound would have gone away. Like, really? And I did enjoy Helen's response to that, which was, look, it's not my fault you never taught your son to say no, or never said no to him. I liked the characterization there of Paris as like a spoiled princeling, and that comes across in a couple of the chapters. Like he's never been told no, he's been indulged far too much. And again, that section of the Trojan women, it sounds like he never actually took responsibility for what happened. It wasn't his fault. He saw something and he took it, and that's what he's been taught to do his whole life. And really the fault was Menelaus for having such a bizarre response. I mean, who does that? Who goes to war because someone steals your wife? Really? It's a thing that happens. And then in Oenone's chapter, where he like crawls back to her because she can heal him. She's a nymph. She's got like magical powers. Like, I'm on my knees, please heal me. And she said, you're on your knees for yourself. You're not on your knees because you feel bad about anything that happened. I am not going to help you. And I thought that was like a really good response, because he's abandoned her son. He didn't even tell her that he wasn't coming back. He's like, I'm going to go and confront my parents. And then she finds out months later from a tradesman or someone like passing through mentions, oh, by the way, Paris is in Troy with a new wife. And she's just, what? My husband is not coming back then. We have a son. And he's just abandoned me. This is the only point I feel in Paris's life where he's actually been held accountable, properly accountable, for his crimes. So I felt these two were, even in the very brief glimpses that we get of them, compared to, say, the Brad Pitt movie, they're much more fully fleshed out characters. There is backstory and reason and motive behind what they're doing. In Paris's case, it's because he's a spoiled brat who was never told no. In Helen's case, it was like kind of really her only viable option, and she just kind of went and tried to make the best of a bad lot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, the Oinoni chapter was so interesting. Also, just because like it's not in the original source material in the Iliad, we get it in other sources, which, you know. But yeah, no, because it shocks me. I don't know why, but it definitely shocks me that like a lot of people just like didn't know that she was a character, a person, and they didn't know that like Paris was married before all of this when he was trying to be a simple shepherd. So I did love her chapter. I mean, there's so many I love. But one I really wanted to bring attention to was I'm curious what you think of the very unique and different way that Natalie chose to do the Penelope sections, because that's like different from everything else.
It's a narrative.
It's a narrative. It's a first person narrative of them going through these scenarios. So yeah, let's talk about Penelope.
So the Penelope sections are letters to Odysseus, and I really liked them, and I thought they worked very well. They bring you out of the narrative, obviously, because it's such a change in style, but I think it gives a very good like feeling of distance and separation that you know is there between Penelope and Odysseus, because it takes him, he's at Troy for 10 years, and then it takes him another 10 years to get home. So you have Penelope like writing to him about how clever it was for him to try and pretend he was mad and not be taken to Troy in the first place. And then there's a letter kind of with her just talking to him about the trials he's going through on his odyssey home.
I do love how unique it is. I thought the letters were such an amazing touch, just because it's different. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the Odyssey as a classicist, as just someone who casually loves Greek stories and mythologies, but to have this, when it came out in 2020, be the first time that you have something written directly from Penelope and not just some dramatic thing of her just being like, oh no, my husband is gone. Because usually when you do get anything about her, it's always in the context of the suitors. So you basically just get what you get from the Odyssey. So any other representation, I think, that I've seen or read or heard or whatever, it's always her struggle with the suitors, her struggle with Telemachus because he wants to go, you know, oppose the suitors, but he wants to find his father and he wants to do this, that, and the other thing. And all you hear is, you know, some sort of, woe is me, I'm, you know, the dutiful wife, and he's just gone and I'm doing my duty. That gets a little tiring. It's tired for me. Like I'm just like, nah, something new. So the fact that this was like something really new, and it gives her a personality back, because I feel like other representations, she has no personality beyond, I'm a dutiful wife and I miss him, but he's gone for 20 years and I don't know what to do. So I'm just gonna weave and be like the original sad girl. You know, it's like, okay. So yeah, to get her and have her be bitingly witty and funny.
I was going to say, there's such a good dose of humor in there. It's so full of personality. I loved it.
Yeah. So yeah, no, for me to have this and her be anything but the original sad girl, I was so excited. I was like, yes, we finally have something that like makes her into a fully realized three-dimensional character, because she's so used to being third fiddle to everything else. And I do like how it's letters too, because it allows her the freedom to sign them in like she can be sad, she can be funny, she can be pissed off. I don't know. Yeah, to me, it makes her more well-rounded.
No, I agree. It was excellently done. And I'm interested to see where particularly the Trojan women story goes, how that evolves, because you've got such a wide range of characters in that one story thread, and they're all dealing with this very, very differently. And can I just say, I do not like Hecuba.
Yeah, me neither.
She's mean. And it's such a contrast coming from Troy, Fall of a City, where she's like everyone's mother and essentially falls on her sword when her husband dies. And here it's just, she's, I mean, understandably bitter and grief-stricken, having lost almost all of her children. But she's awful to Cassandra. Just horrific. And then obviously mean to Helen, because it's Helen's fault that the war happened and no one wants her there anyway. And then you've got Andromache, who's just kind of being stoic. And yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with them.
I wanted to ask you, what did you think of the Briseis and Chryseis chapter? Because that also is one of the longer ones.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of my least favorites.
Ooh,
it was still well written, but Chryseis, I mean, she's a child, right? So it's written from a very childish perspective, and she sneaks out of the city at night to see her boyfriend, and then the boyfriend gets killed, and then she kind of just goes with the Greeks because going with them seems like a better plan than yelling and having her dad be super mad at her that she snuck out. And I'm like, yeah, you are an actual child. I think on a personal level, she just irritated me a little bit. I did like how she kind of described the Greeks. You get a very good sense of who Agamemnon is, a good sense of who Achilles is. And she has can we say a crush on Briseis? Is that a reasonable thing?
I would say so.
It comes across as a crush. Briseis was a really cool character. I enjoyed her. She's tragic, which sounds like it's a really stupid thing to say, that like it's a book of tragedy, but she feels particularly tragic in a way that I'm not sure the others do yet. Because I think you have this great scene where she's essentially arguing with Patroclus, who's like, have you always looked this sad? And she looks at him like, fucking moron, my entire family has died or been killed. Tell me, should I be looking happy right now? And he's like, no. What I mean is, like, you look beautiful when you're sad. Have you always just looked sad? What a fucking stupid question to ask a woman. You're a moron. I don't like Patroclus in this at all. I don't like Achilles either, but Patroclus is just dumb idiot. And yeah, he frustrated me. And Agamemnon also, horrible person.
I mean, it's so different, right? Coming from like reading Wrath Goddess not too long ago and having us love Patroclus, like, just being like, you are amazing, to having him be like, sort of really dumb and unlikable in this one.
A bit that I did enjoy in that section was Briseis's kind of characterization of Achilles and Patroclus when they're walking back to the tent with her. She notices how they're both going out of their way to try and be kind to one another. Mm-hmm. And Patroclus is trying to cheer up Achilles, and Achilles is trying to cheer up Patroclus, and she's like, this is super weird. This is so bizarre. I enjoyed that. I felt that was a kind of an innovative way to approach the relationship between the two of them, having it described from someone who is like expecting some kind of toxic masculinity type warrior culture. That was cool. And I liked the little kind of trick Achilles and Patroclus play on Agamemnon. So the soldiers have to line the women up in order of most attractive, and they put Chryseis right at the very front, saying that she's the most attractive woman. And so Agamemnon obviously chooses her because everyone has declared she is the most attractive. And then Achilles takes Briseis, and they're walking back to the Myrmidons' camp, and Patroclus says, I can't believe that Agamemnon didn't choose this woman. She's clearly the most beautiful woman in the history of women. And Achilles kind of grins at him and is like, well, I mean, everyone else decided otherwise. Ha 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 ha. I may have paid the soldiers to change the order of the women because I knew that you wanted this one, and I knew that Agamemnon would go with whoever was put first. That was amusing.
I did like the section of Briseis when it talks about her crying and the characterization of she had gone so long without crying. I mean, Achilles had killed her entire family, and then it was a sick joke that he chose her. And then she was like, she didn't cry when Patroclus died, even though he eventually sort of had been kind to her. And she even says, like, yeah, he was kind to me. So she was like, I thought maybe I'd be sad. And then she was, like, she didn't cry. And then, I just found it so interesting to have that whole section and then have it end on this, like, sort of, and the way Natalie reads it is just brilliant because it's like, finally when Achilles she has this sort of monologue about when Priam comes to beg for Hector, and she was like astounded that this cruel warrior that she describes says yes, and then Hector is returned, and then when Achilles finally dies, she is weeping, and yet it's not for him, it's literally for everyone else. So that was really powerful, and to have that read to me, I was like, oh my god. So I sat with that one for a bit. So yeah, I don't know if Briseis and Chryseis is one of my favorite chapters of the first half because there's so many good ones. I will mention one of my favorites is Penthesilea because I just am fascinated by Penthesilea, and we've now seen her in Troy Fall of the City. We've had her not for very long, but we've had her in Wrath Goddess. So what did you think of this particular version of her? Because she's played on a much more sort of tragically sad note. I mean, I think in Troy Fall of the City she's just very aggressive, I'm out for revenge. This one is like very different.
Yeah, this one, her sister, she's accidentally killed her sister and she can't live anymore because it's very nicely described. Her sister is her other half, and her other half is no longer here, and she doesn't want to be here either. And the best way she can think of to go out is to go and fight Achilles, because either she'll kill him and, glory to her as an amazing warrior, or much more likely she will die and be killed by the most famous warrior in the whole world and go and join her sister. And the description leading up to them going to Troy is very nicely done. You get a really good sense of the relationship between Penthesilea and Hippolyta, and then they ride off to Troy, and it says that her women are unsure, like if she's going there to die or if she's going there to fight. And you kind of get the feeling that Penthesilea isn't really sure either. Either are good options, and maybe both at the same time. And in a similar way to both Wrath Goddess and Fall of a City, the duel isn't really a duel. And in Thousand Ships, you get it told from Achilles' perspective. He's like riding up with his myrmidons, and there are all these new warriors like attacking them, and he's like, who dares to attack my myrmidons? Because it sounds like no one else is willing to touch them because they're so deadly by this point in the battle. And then Penthesilea's horse is taken out, and she leaps off and lands on her feet, and Achilles is in absolute awe of this king, this amazing warrior who can do that. I mean, maybe not in awe, but impressed by. And they lock eyes, and Achilles is like, everyone knows this is just going to be a battle between the two of us. And they go, and from how it's written, it's a devastatingly short battle. It doesn't sound like Penthesilea even touches him because Achilles is just so fast. And that's something that's kind of stressed in the narrative a couple of times, exactly how fast he is. He's in, he kills her, he's done. And then he sees that this is a woman, and she whispers something, and they don't tell you what it is until like right at the very end. Achilles is like sad almost because he feels like he's killed someone, like his mirror image. He's killed his double in the way that Penthesilea lost hers in her sister. And the chapter ends with him wondering if anyone else has ever said thank you before they die. And Penthesilea, like, that's what she whispered to him, thank you, because that's what she was looking for, was a death so she could join her sister. I feel like we got a lot more personality in Penthesilea than previous adaptations, even in Fall of a City where she gets more screen time. You're right, she's awesome, but she's a little one-dimensional. There's just like rage. That's just kind of it. There is rage, and she will kill Achilles or be killed. And this one, it's a lot more. There's grief, there's anger, there's like memories of how things were with her sister when they were children, and there's like flashes of happiness in there. And she's a fuller character, and obviously in Wrath Goddess she's relatively inconsequential. Yeah. I enjoyed that the characterization of her. I think that was beautifully written. Yeah,
I definitely agree, because I mean, look, I'm very happy that in Fall of a City they do include her. That's an improvement over the movie where she's not a thing. But yeah, no, I mean, I think for her, even if she's one-dimensional, I think it was still fun to see, because she still got one of the best lines.
Oh, she was still great. She's still
show, for sure,
fantastic. Yeah,
but it's like, I think, I mean, they sort of gave her the backstory where they're like, Achilles killed the people she loves. But, like, that doesn't, I mean, as horrible as it is to say, like, in war, a lot of people die. And so, like, what would separate this Amazon warrior queen from any of the other people?
From the other ones,
whose family died at Achilles' hand? I mean, so it's kind of like, well, she's got to have more than that. And the fact that they don't really explain that, it's a bit lacking. So to have more backstory is more appreciated for me. I don't know. Do you find her more likable, equally as likable, or is it just she's explained, but we don't? She's not a character who's meant to be liked or disliked. It's just kind of like, this is her story.
I think in Thousand Ships she is more likable and she's much more sympathetic. I think in Fall of a City she's amazing and awesome, and I would not want to meet her in a dark alley. But she's not terribly sympathetic. Even with the Achilles killed everyone I love, even with that. And actually none of the Amazons are. They are like hard warriors, and they're kind of the female corollary to like Achilles. I feel in that particular show. Like, he's not a terribly sympathetic character either. This is what he does. He kills shit. That's what the Amazons just do. They also kill shit. I felt like in Thousand Ships she was more human. Maybe that's a better way to put it. She was more human.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Someone I did also want to mention is we do actually get a chapter on Iphigenia. We've seen her in other adaptations, but not to this extent. So what did you think of her chapter?
I think Natalie captured the self-absorption of a 16-year-old girl very, very well. And maybe that's why I dislike Chryseis as well. They're self-absorbed teenagers. And it comes across in Chryseis' chapter. You're like, oh my God, get over yourself. And it's even stronger in Iphigenia's chapter. It's a riot. I mean, it's such a bizarre thing to say when you know that she dies at the end. But up until then, it's an absolute riot to read, because you've got her like preparation for getting married and the journey all the way there, and then she's kind of pissed off that there isn't a welcoming committee when they get to the camp, and you'd have thought Achilles would present himself officially, and she takes her brother, she takes Orestes down to the beach so he can play, and she's sitting there all prettily, and she's very attractive, and none of the soldiers are even going to say hello to this beautiful princess, and how rude of them. And just how dare they? She's a 16-year-old girl. It was perfectly characterized. And then it's just there's this looming sense of tragedy, because you know what's going to happen. And then right at the end, she's walking up to the altar, and it suddenly clicks in her head. She sees Achilles isn't there. Her father has a knife. Her mother is being held back, and there's no wind. And she's like, well, we know what happens when the gods aren't doing what we would like them to do. We have a sacrifice, and that would be why I'm here. And it's not described in detail, but it feels like she meets her death with a lot of grace and bravery. I think in a similar manner to Fall of a City. There's no struggling, there's no begging or pleading. It's just, this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to stand and face it. And then you get Agamemnon. Again, in a tiny snippet in Chryseis' story, you get Agamemnon living with it and seeing how deeply it obviously affected him. But it was very well written. I wouldn't say a favorite, because it's difficult to say that subject matter can be a favorite of anything, but it was very well done. What were your thoughts on it?
I think because we had the same story, just done differently, obviously, because they didn't have it from her perspective, but we had the scene in Fall of a City. I thought it sort of mirrored it pretty well, because what you do see of Iphigenia when she does get her bit of dialogue, she's like in the carriage with her mother, with Clytemnestra, and she's like, she's talking about, I'm so excited, I'm going to be married, and this is amazing. And then, she gets there and she's like, well, where is he? And they're like, oh, no, he's getting ready. He's very excited. He's just, you'll see him soon. And then she's like, okay. And then she kind of like goes about her business. So I liked how, it was kind of this cool thing where I felt like what I was reading or listening to was putting the inner monologue in what I was watching in the show, right? So it's like I had the visual of the show, having just watched it not too long ago, but now I was able to put more of an inner monologue to that, and it actually made the entire thing much more powerful, because if I was, reading it from her perspective and then watching what was portrayed in front of me, it made it a more rounded experience, is how I'm gonna put that. So it was very interesting to have that kind of going on. The benefit is having watched the show, so I had something to imagine, so I didn't have to do all the heavy lifting myself. Again, you can't really say it's a favorite, but in terms of how well written was it, and did she capture the essence of the person she's trying to write for? A++, and this is why I love, I know feminist retellings of Greek myth is like becoming like a very popular subgenre, and a lot of people are attempting it, but all I can say is like, it really shows that like you can characterize things and have something done really well when it's written by someone who would have had this experience, right? So we're sitting here like, all these other retellings done by men. Okay, no, none of them knew what it was like to be a freaking 16-year-old girl. Guess what? Natalie knew. Natalie was a 16-year-old girl.
I remember that feeling very well, and oh my god.
I know. So it's like so relatable, right? Because like as I was reading it, I was like, I remember when I was 16. I probably would have reacted very similarly. So it humanizes her for me even more, and knowing that the author was someone who also knew and could capture these feelings that a person who was a 16-year-old girl would understand, I thought was really, really well done. So no, I really enjoyed. I just love the entire the first half is just excellent. And so one thing I kind of want to ask ahead for is for the second half of the book, I'm sure you've peeked at the names of the women who are...
I actually haven't.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, okay, well then since you haven't, who are you hoping to hear from, and who are you, for the ones who probably are predictably either going to be, or for the ones that will keep popping up who we've heard from so far, who are you most excited to see their story continue?
Well, I was looking forward to Helen, but we found out today that Helen does not have her own chapter, so that I'm going to be interested to see how she figures in other people's stories. And I tentatively am agreeing with you that not having her was a good choice, but I want to reserve judgment until I finish the whole book. So interested to see how Helen pops up in other places and whether this characterization of her as kind of selfish, self-obsessed holds through. I am interested to see how the Trojan women play out. And actually, I want to hear more from Penelope as well.
Those are good.
I want to at least one more Penelope chapter. That would be nice.
No, we have several, and it's amazing. We have several.
Several, fantastic. So what are you most looking forward to revisiting?
So it's been a while since, well, I haven't touched the physical book since I left home for Greece, but I've listened to it a few times, and the listening experience is different because since you can't sort of look ahead, it's this fun situation where I get to sort of hear, oh, right, and this person's next, and then, and usually I'm listening to the book and I'm distracted and I'm doing things, so it's like a half listening, but I'm really excited because I remember Eris has a chapter.
Oh.
And
that's going to be fun.
Yeah. And from what I remember, she's really like as snotty as you would think about I can't believe I was not invited. This must be a mistake. Like, well, now that they've hurt me, I'm going to cause trouble. Ha ha ha. So I just remember it was sort of written in that vein. So I'm looking forward to revisiting Eris. I don't think it's a particularly long chapter, but it was a fun one. And then I would say, actually, there were three other major ones that I want to highlight. We get a chapter with Cassandra, and I don't remember anything about it, so I'm happy to relive that. Mm-hmm. I do remember there is a chapter on Clytemnestra, and it's one of the longer ones, and I remember loving it the first time because it was just so well written. But I think one of my favorites of the entire book appears, I think she's one of the last two chapters. She might be the second to last. We have a longer chapter for Andromache, and I do vividly remember how that chapter goes because of its placement as the last one and because of the way Natalie reads it. It's particularly harrowing. I think the first time I read it, it made me weep a bit. And I never get weepy for books, but I had a stray tear come down my face. I remember just the reaction being so unexpected. So I've read it twice. I've listened to it countless times. I'll put just that chapter on sometimes. It's so powerful, and it really, I remember it capturing the heartbreak of a mother. Yes, because she talks about Astyanax being, essentially like thrown off the walls, but then she does go back with her Greek captor, and then she does actually bear another child. But it's this very heart-wrenching split screen of talking about having lost a child with the man that she was deeply in love with, to going from despising to not really liking but tolerating the father of the second child because of her love for the child. And so it's this really interesting characterization. So I'm really looking forward to...
There's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you thought about each of those, but especially Andromache. I don't know, just like as a mother, I feel like you are going to have a lot to say about the Andromache chapter because it's a longer one and it's like the second to last chapter. So she kind of is the major character to wrap up the entire novel, because I think the very last one is like a short one with like Calliope essentially tying things in a bow. But Andromache just talk about a closer, man. She like comes in, she hits you like a train, so you definitely don't forget this novel. And then you're like, why did you do that to me, Natalie? Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
Yeah. And not spoiler, but fun fact, if you do want to listen to the audiobook, if anyone chooses to go for the audiobook, if you listen closely enough, you might be able to hear Natalie is actually crying as she reads this chapter, certain segments of it. So that's a little nugget if you choose to listen to the audiobook, which I highly recommend.
I think I will probably go back and do the audiobook after.
Yeah, no, I suggest it.
I don't normally do audiobooks, but you're really selling this.
Yeah, no, I will. Okay, so that's something I will mention. I do like audiobooks a lot, but I promised myself that I would read this one, like physically read it first. And I was really happy that I did, so I could sort of come to my own thoughts and figure out my own emotion, what I think is happening. But then to go back and then listen to the audiobook immediately after, for me, was a really great experience, because then I could basically, I had my thoughts and then I had hers.
Well, especially having the author read it yourself or read it herself. I feel like you probably get a lot of the emotion as it was intended.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I really wanted to know after I'd had a chance to sort of process and think about it myself. So if you want to read this book, which I absolutely say you should read this book. Everyone should read this book. But yes, you should read it physically first yourself, but then yes, you should listen to the audiobook, because it is fabulous. I don't have enough time in the world to just talk about how much I love this book. There's a reason it was shortlisted.
And there are so many little additional stories that we don't have time to touch on. But I will say that there are a couple of women that I hadn't heard of, and they're so far removed from most of the plot, like the actual Trojan War. But you get all of the knock-on effects of all of these men leaving their wives and families. And beautifully written, very well done. Highly recommended.
I really had never heard of Theano, but then we get a Theano chapter, and I was like, whoa, okay, she's actually kind of not like important, but she is a valuable voice to be heard, because her husband was a traitor, and like I definitely didn't remember that, and I was like, wait, she survived, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, so her husband was a traitor. So yeah, there's some other I feel like there's some other women in chapters who are less known in the second half, that you may know their name, but you don't know anything about them. I remember there's like a short chapter on like the Morai, and I was like, I don't remember anything about this. So
highly recommended for the first half, and we'll be back next week with the second half. And I'm very excited.
Yay! Oh, I am so excited. All right, see you next week, guys. Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.